Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, near and far. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you to Dave, who's doing tech tonight, because Jason Zivik is getting married tomorrow, so he has the weekend off. We'll definitely fet him and celebrate Jason when he's here, whichever the first Friday night he's back, but we're so happy for him that he's getting married. And yes, I was in Israel with Randy last weekend for a very fast trip because we went for the wedding of a good friend. And while we were there, of course, we did a bunch of different meetings. And I'm not going to talk extensively about it tonight, except to say it is always inspiring to watch the people who are doing the really hard work on the ground. And Israel, like the United States, there are different categories of people. There are people who are causing the problems. There are people who are burying their heads in the sand and ignoring the problems. And there are people who are actually working hard to solve things. And guess what? The first two groups are the biggest, no question, there and here. The third group, those who are actually working to solve the problems, the smallest in number, but the absolutely most inspiring human beings alive. And let's keep that in mind, right? It's being in Israel, I'm always really inspired, and Randy and I met with some phenomenal people who are doing the hard work of facing the evil of the occupation, the military occupation that Israel is engaged in of millions of Palestinians, about to evict 1,000 Palestinians from homes in which they've lived for generations from the South Hebron Hills. The Supreme Court has recently determined that that is legal to do in order to have what? More land for the military to have military exercises. Absolutely unconscionable. It will create so much suffering, horrifying. And we met many of the people who are working so hard to fight that. Again, it's inspiring. You know, as Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. And it's true on the enormous issues that are facing us, as well on the little issues. There are so many conflicts and problems happening in Israel. And you know what? I go there and I get inspired by the people who have been working really hard on the ground for decades. And they have a lot to teach all of us who imagine that the chaos we're facing here in the United States is new. Guess what? It's not new in the world. And there's a lot to learn from the people who have been keeping on for a long time. But the problems are real. The racism in Israel is, as it is here, expanding. The racism against Mizrahi Jews, the racism against Ethiopian Jews, the racism against Arabs, both Israeli Arabs as well as Palestinians. And guess in which age group it is increasing the most? Young people. Similar to what we're seeing here in the United States, there is an infection of hatred. The parallels are so spooky, right? But I guess it's worldwide, right, Tanya? We're seeing this all over the world. So I stand with those proudly who are fighting for justice, whether it's in Israel or Palestine, or whether it's in the Balkans or in Africa or here in the United States. And the fight is a long one. While we were in Israel, one of the people we met with were people from the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, which is one of the oldest activist organizations in Israel. It's kind of like the ACLU. It's not the same because they don't have a constitution. So there are a lot of differences legally about what the lawyers do and how they do it. The ACLU, of course, is based on the amendments to the Constitution that are our Bill of Rights. Israel has to function differently because they don't have a constitution and they don't have a Bill of Rights. So legally it's very different. But the Association for Civil Rights in Israel is one of the foundational organizations that fights the racism inside of Israeli Jewish society, which is horrific, and the racism that is towards Arabs, both inside of Israel and the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And it is now headed by Rabbi Noah Satat, a lesbian, longtime friend of CBST's, and we met with her to talk about what's happening to try and deal with racism inside the educational system of Israel for Israeli citizens. And It's notable for many, many reasons, but one of them is Dan Yakir, whom many of us know, who is the gay man who is the legal director of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. For many, many, many years, he's spoken at CBST. Whenever we take trips, we often meet with him. He's one of the great civil rights lawyers and activists in Israel. He's the one who has been fighting the eviction of the Palestinians from the South Hebron Hills for 22 years. He stood up in court 2 weeks ago and he said, I have been representing these people since they were young, and now they are grandparents, and I have gray hair, and the evil remains. Anyway, we were there. What else is the Association for Israel known for in terms of they did most of the gay rights cases in Israel, among many others. But I want to acknowledge and I want to thank Regina for bringing this to my attention, although we had heard about it when we were in Israel last week, that Jonathan Danilovich died on August 12th. Jonathan was from South Africa, made Aliyah to Israel, and was a steward, a flight attendant on El Al. And El Al would not allow same-sex benefits to be extended to his partner. And in 1988, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel represented Jonathan in suing the state of Israel, and because the state of Israel owned El Al and suing El Al, and it wend its way through the legal system. And in 1995, the Supreme Court determined in Israel that El Al had to extend full benefits to Jonathan's gay partner, obviously gay, his male partner, which was the first major case for legal rights in Israel. And Jonathan, many of you remember him who are kind of longtime members of CBST because he was very frequently at CBST in the early years and very well known among the earlier generations of CBST. And he started one of the first gay organizations in Israel as well. So he passed away on August 12th. So we remember him and activism that makes change actually happen. And in Israel, all the change, all the civil rights for gay people or anybody comes from the Supreme Court. There has never been a single law passed in the parliament in Israel which has been positive for gay people. The parliament in Israel is very, very, very conservative, or Knesset, and the Supreme Court has been the source of civil rights and good decisions. But the right wing in Israel is working hard now to dismantle the Supreme Court in much the same way we see happening here. And if the Supreme Court is dismantled in the way that the right wing in Israel would like to see, that is the last bastion. It is the only arm in the Israeli government that is really the source of liberal or progressive laws and policies. So, why do I focus a little bit on so much bad news or difficult news? I've spoken before about this season in terms of the haftarot that we read. In general, the haftarot or haftorahs, depending on what your background is or what kind of Hebrew you speak, the haftorahs or haftarot, all year long are based on the prophets and a reading that has to do with the Parsha. So we read two things every Shabbat morning from the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. That's the scroll we take out for those who aren't familiar with Shabbat morning services. But we also read something from the prophets, which has some thematic, sometimes it's very, 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 very thin, but some kind of connection. It might be a word. It's not always so profound, but sometimes it is the connection between the Haftarah and the Torah portion, except for 10 weeks of the year. The 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, which are the 17th of Tammuz, from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av, during those 3 weeks, we read haftarot of condemnation or affliction. And these are haftarot that are not related at all to the Parsha, but to the time of the year. And those haftarot are all about the bad things that have happened to us, or God condemns us. Those 3 weeks are considered in traditional Judaism terrible times. And a traditional Jew, and I don't know if anybody here was raised this way, a traditional Jew will not travel during those 3 weeks. They will not have surgery. They will not do anything that's particularly risky. They won't sometimes even go swimming during those 3 weeks, not just because of the pleasure issue, but it's considered for a Jew to be a heightened, terrible time. Terrible things will happen and historically have happened during those 3 weeks. And so a traditional Jew will not, tempt fate or let the evil eye have a little more strength. So just, you don't go swimming in the ocean during those 3 weeks. You don't do risky or Joel, did you grow up like that? See, Joel, I could look at Joel, I could know, I'm looking around. Who grew up in a traditional family? During those 3 weeks, you'd barely walk out of the house. You don't fly. Some traditional Jews don't take an airplane during that time, though, of course, cars, I know, statistically are much more. And what else, Joel, did you not do in your community during those 3 weeks?
They do laundry during the 9 days.
For the last 9 days, you didn't even do laundry.
Some people wouldn't take a shower for the 9 days.
Wouldn't take a shower. There was really... So that's these 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av is the focus on all of the dangers and crises. And what I love about Judaism is that it makes it tactile. We're supposed to actually live in ways that make us aware of it. It's not just, intellectual. And then what happens after those 3 weeks? The Shabbat after Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Nachamu, which was last Shabbat, which, by the way, what a glorious service. I was able to watch it because of that all of you led along with Joyce and with Amanda. But not only was it the night of the murdered poets, it is the first Shabbat after Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Nachamu, and it begins 7 weeks of consolation, or it's known in Jewish life as those 7 weeks are, there are different ways that people call them, but they're 7 weeks of consolation. And the Haftarot for these 7 weeks are from the book of Isaiah, and they're full of consoling words and comforting words. And we have these 3 weeks of terror and crisis, and then 7 weeks of consolation. And it leads us from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. So there are 7 weeks, 7 Shabbatot between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. So I have been so aware, both as a human being and as rabbi at CBST, of the kind of Tisha B'Av-ness of the world for the last number of years. Right? Don't you agree? Doesn't it feel like it's Tisha B'Av all the time? The news is bad. You can't, the newspaper is bad. And it's so bad that you can't even, we don't even, if you're a normal human being, you don't even have the imagination to imagine things could be as bad as they actually are. And you read something and we're shocked, and it's like, oh no, then the next day it's, oh my God, that can't be, we can't get worse, right? And you've heard me say Friday night after Friday night, it's gonna get worse. It's like Tisha B'Av, boom, boom, boom. Bad thing after bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. But our tradition teaches us this very moving and profound truth that is hard to absorb. After these 3 weeks of affliction, God is trying to comfort us. The question is, from where does the comfort actually come? Excuse me. It's not COVID. I mean, this summer, think about it. Tisha B'Av, first of all, COVID is not going away anytime soon, right? It's just, we're waiting for the new variant. It's going to come, and it's somehow going to be worse than the last 5 variants. It's going to cause, I don't even want to say it out loud. It's going to be bad, right? We know that somehow. Then we got the monkeypox. And then polio. Polio. What is this? How can we be having polio again, people? Polio is gone. Polio is back. So even if you just forget, You just don't even look at, oh my God, what Rudy Giuliani is doing, or what, oh my, even if you just think about the natural disasters, oh my God, did you read the article in the Times about we're waiting for a massive storm about to hit California, unlike any storm that's ever had, and the New York Times even has a little graphic you can move through to show how bad it's going to be. I mean, it's like Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av. It's like, where's the relief? It gets, and then, did you hear about the bees? Like there's this, and then in Asia, there's a monkey that's attacking children. I just keep seeing this. I just think, oh my God, here comes another Tisha B'Av. It's like, that's what it is. So, what? Yeah, you're waiting for the good news? So this Shev Nechemta, which is the 7 weeks of Nechemta, of the comfort, where does it come from? Isaiah is full of a lot of beautiful words. Guess what? Nobody listened to Isaiah when he was alive, by the way. All these haftarot that we read, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Amos, nobody listened to them. Never. The only prophet people ever listened to was Jonah, and he wasn't Jewish. The Jewish prophets, nobody listened to. They geshrai. But now we read them. Now we are so moved and inspired, but believe me, when they were alive, nobody listened to them. But Isaiah is speaking to us now. And what does Isaiah say to us? This nachamu, nachamu. So I don't know. I don't have the answer entirely. I want to start tonight. I know we don't have much time. I'm going to ask each of us to ask ourselves this question. What brings you comfort? Tisha B'Av is all around. Where do you get comfort? I mean it. I'm going to ask this question. We're going to take a minute. Here, Rabbi James, I'm going to turn this on. Who here, what brings you comfort? Think about it for a second. What brings you comfort? Briefly, I just want to hear this. You are now Isaiah, okay? We are all the Isaiahs we need. Bonnie? No, we're going to use a microphone so that the folks online can hear. Just
being here on Shabbat always brings me comfort.
Tell me why, Bonnie. What brings you comfort there?
A feeling of love, community, safety. It's
so being here, going to a place in which you feel love and safety and some connectedness. All right, we are all Isaiah right now. So when you hear Bonnie say that, Bonnie, what you have to, we're going to have to figure out ways to say it that you're saying, all right, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av. But here's Bonnie speaking. Bonnie is our Isaiah. Be with people. Don't be isolated. Find, right? Am I expanding this into be in places in which you feel some connection? Okay, back there. Thanks for using the mic so we can make it. And folks online, Sharon, would you ask people online? Each of us is Isaiah. What are you going to teach us? Teach me something. What brings you comfort?
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a member, but I haven't been here in a long time.
Hi, Michael.
When my feral kitty cats, who live in my backyard and my front yard, show up at the door for food in the morning, for me to feed them, that brings me comfort. And
Beautiful.
I figured out that it's because my therapist told me that whenever I talk, my love language is always acts of service. And
Beautiful.
I was going to say the damn kitty. The cats don't. They just want me to feed them. They let me feed them.
Yep.
And they don't argue or.
All right. This is Isaiah speaking to us. This is where you'll get comfort. Acts of service. And sometimes not engaging with people who have a lot of things to say. And being around animals, creatures who. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you, Isaiah. Over here.
Taking care of my plants.
Beautiful. So another act of service, right? Taking care of something. Taking care of plants, the natural world, something that's beautiful, that brings you beauty into your apartment, or if you have a farm or a garden. So that's beautiful. Thank you, Isaiah. Somebody else. Lewis. Louis.
Thank you,
Rabbi
Rabbi.
James is going to hold it. You cannot
Okay.
hold the microphone,
Sorry.
Louis.
To me, travel brings me comfort.
Beautiful.
Going out all over the world, seeing people of different cultures, religions, races, meeting them, hugging them, seeing
With consent.
other creatures, animals. That's what brings me
Beautiful.
comfort.
Thank you, Isaiah. Travel. Get out of your little box. Right? Seeing new people, new things, new cultures, learning being exposed to new things, having your brain see and feel and taste and smell new things and new cultures and new people. Beautiful. Thank you, Isaiah. Do we have a few more things? What, Bubala? Thank you. Thank you, Louis. That was beautiful. Who else has something that brings you comfort that you can add to this? Rafaela. Is everybody listening? You must be listening.
Music.
Music. Listening to it, creating it. Think about this. This is Isaiah speaking to us today. And in Isaiah's words of thousands of years ago, he was saying the same thing. And God will be present in all of these things you just described. And I know that each of you could add to this Haftorah, this sacred text. Nachamu, Nachamu, be comforted, Ami, my people. That means we have to be active about seeking out those things which bring us comfort. We must not be passive and only say the Gesherai stuff, which is endless. So listen to each other's Torah here tonight. Create more yourself. And when you can't figure it out, turn to your friends, your partners, people you know, and say, can you tell me what brings you comfort? And write it down. Because there are days where you're going to have to be reminded. Shabbat Shalom.